So 3, 2, 1. Perfect.
Perfect.
And
we did it.
we did. Hello, everybody. This is Heather, once again, your content and community manager here at Double Fine. I am doing another chat. Didn't talk to you last week because my apartment was on fire, so sorry about that. But we're following up to talk more about the level that you saw during our Xbox Showcase trailer with Jack Black and everything, and also just to talk with another member of the team. Today, I am talking with senior level designer Jon Herbert. Hello, Josh.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I am doing very well, thank you. How are you doing?
It is the end of the week. I'm doing fantastic.
Yeah, Friday.
It's very exciting.
Excellent.
I'm in New Hampshire, which is very comfortable and cozy.
Sounds great.
There's a new Final Fantasy patch coming soon, which is good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody's saying they can't hear anything, but I don't know if that's true for everybody, because I can definitely hear you.
I can definitely hear you as well. The reason you might not be able to hear anything, even though, I wouldn't be, there's no reason for me to say it audibly because you can't hear me. But, check settings, I guess. I don't know, check your settings.
Some people are saying that they can hear fine. Check your settings. We will troubleshoot that as we go. But for now, I want to talk with you because, I talked with Lizette and Emily. Lizette Montgomery and Emily Johnston like 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. And we were talking about the level that we showed off and then also their background. So to start us off, because my secret thing here is using this as a way to learn everything about my coworkers, tell me a little bit about your background, and then we'll kind of talk about how you got to Double Fine, and then also kind of your current work that you do.
Sure. So my background, I grew up playing games. This is a pretty standard, I think, story in most of game development. Is I grew up playing games and loving it. And
Yes.
I was always intrigued by it because it was sort of this this science, right? It was like this technology. And as a child, like as a kid playing like Nintendo and stuff, I just could not understand how you could change electricity and plastic and metal into this like visual experience that was amazing. So I started studying it when I was a young boy and just started learning more about it, started making mods for games way back in the days of like early Command and Conquer and Warcraft. Not like World of Warcraft, but like the RTS.
Were you ever like a Half-Life modder or anything like that? Because that's where I got into
Absolutely.
modding. Yeah, very good.
Yep.
Playing around with Gold Source. I love Gold Source so much.
Oh my gosh. I got really heavily into it in like the Counter-Strike days, of course. I was in a Counter-Strike like modding community.
Yes, perfect. You're my favorite person I've talked to now. This is fantastic.
Yeah, so I mean, I wasn't like, a big prevalent person, and the funny thing was I didn't do level design then, which is what I do now. I tried to do, I tried to do weapon skins. That was like my whole thing back then.
Okay.
And I was in a community called CS Skins. We just, it turned into just a community instead of making actual content for Counter-Strike. But yeah, so I used to do that. Like the first 3D level I ever built, I think, was in Duke Nukem 3D back in the day. And so I did it as a hobby. And then I was actually like in my career before I got into games, I learned sales and customer service and like call center stuff, and it was terrible and I hated it.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I feel like a lot of people, like one of two things happens is like either people are like, yeah, and then I just studied like computer programming forever, or you have people who are like, yeah, and then I went to school for theater, right? And that didn't help me at all. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, my college degree. So I went to a community college in Colorado. It was called Front Range Community College.
Front Range.
Yep. Good old Front Range Community College.
What was your mascot?
I don't think we had a mascot.
Okay.
As a community college, I don't remember.
Wow.
What it was. I don't know. Maybe I don't know if we had like a sports team or what, but it was like a ram or something. Maybe I don't know. We didn't even have a game design or anything to do with games at the college at the time, and I just got into what was called multimedia technology, and this was, learning how to do Photoshop and After Effects and Flash animations and things, and build websites and do typography and things. A lot of that stuff I'd already taught myself, so it was pretty great. to just breeze through those classes.
Yeah.
And eventually they did add some game design stuff to my curriculum. I did have a game design class, which was extremely broad and vague and didn't really cover anything in depth. But I did have a really excellent teacher, Sean Spradling, who he worked on the original Grand Theft Autos, like the top-down ones.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
So and I had some animation classes, and I try to focus my degree onto 3D animation, which I was largely pretty bad at. And when I graduated, there happened to be an opening for a level designer at a company called Idle Minds in Colorado.
Idle Minds.
They used to make like cool borders. They actually made the first PSN downloadable title called, I think it was called Pain, where you'd like slingshot a ragdoll dude into like a city and you'd try to like make him hit stuff and like, flip around bars and things.
That's so funny. It's like, I don't know. Those type of games are always fun to me to think about, because it's the first time you're really experimenting with those marketplaces, and it's a place.
Exactly.
It's like a place where you could really do a lot of stuff. I worked on a game that was like an Earthbound Wild Western game that ended up on PSN and stuff,
nice.
and it was just like it like for a while at the start of it, it really felt like, for good and for ill, you could put a lot of different stuff up there.
Yeah, it was kind of like just putting out feelers and testing everything out.
Yeah, of course.
I actually wasn't involved with the Pain title. That was just Idle Minds. I worked on an unreleased game that ended up getting canceled. And then, after I got laid off, like I had this opportunity. Like I was in my career. Actually, one interesting thing about getting into Idle Minds. This is my first job in professional games. So
Yes.
my portfolio was like largely stuff I had made in college, which was unrelated to game design, and my modding stuff, which was like ancient at the time.
Yeah.
And one thing they did was they were making a game that was similar to like Diablo or Torchlight, and they had me and other level designers they were interviewing create a level using the Torchlight editor from the first Torchlight.
I went in for a couple narrative design things once, and so I think maybe it was BioWare or Obsidian at the time. We had to make something in like Neverwinter or whatever, which was like, it surprises me how often you actually see that sort of thing happen, right? Just kind of like, hey, use these tools and see what you can do.
Yeah, exactly. And so at the time I was actually unemployed. I just graduated from college, and I didn't have a job at the time. And so I just spent a lot of time building this level, and I made this huge, crazy story arc. And, it's supposed to, the instructions were to make this small, like, chunk of a level because it was supposed to be like a sort of like procedural game. And they just needed like level content, but I made this huge ass level that like went from like took the player from like level 1 to like level like 10 or something.
Very good.
I remember going in for the interview, and they're loading up my level, and it took forever to load. And when it finally loaded up, like the lead level designer was like, "Holy shit!" So, sorry, can I cuss?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, you can say whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny. In chat, you'll see Bentel Giant. I actually started my career with this guy. His name is Ben, and he was a level designer with me, and he was saying my level was 1,000 times larger and more complicated than anyone else's, and and it didn't need to be. I just had extra time, so... but yeah, that's how I ended up getting my first job.
A producer in a room already telling you, like, this is way beyond our scope. Like,
yeah, they literally said in the interview, like, can you guarantee that if we ask you to scope it back, you will do that?
Yeah,
I was
of
like,
course, right?
Tell me to do whatever, like, of course I don't want to have to do that every week.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, just to be clear, I did not work on cool borders. Nothing that launched ever or released from Idle Minds did I work on. Just stuff that got canceled. That was just my first job.
So how do you end up going from there, and kind of what's the path to Double Fine then?
Yeah, so what I ended up doing was, after that, I scrambled to find another job. I applied at every game studio in the world and got a couple callbacks, did a couple level design tests, got turned down a lot. And eventually this company reached out to me called Siftio. They made their own hardware, these little like they're Siftio cubes. They're like not exactly cubes. They're more like little boxes that weren't proper cubes, but they had like a little screen on them that was touch sensitive.
Oh, I'm looking them up now. Oh yeah, I've seen these things. Yeah.
They're super cute, and like the funny thing is, like they're really hard to describe what they actually are, and I feel like that's kind of like the company went under eventually, and I think that's why, is because we just couldn't tell
guess
people why they were cool.
I guess
We
it's
had
like
to
if
show them.
it's like if you were snapping together television monitors that could form together to form levels, or bric-a-brac kind of build your own content or things like that. Kind of. That's like my crappy way of explaining it.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, that's pretty much it. They did have like accelerometers and things in them, and NFC, so you could like touch them together. They would know which side was touching which side of what other cube.
Oh, cool.
And then you could tilt them. And so I made puzzle games for them for a long time, and it was a startup in San Francisco. And I actually had, this is like a really important part, I think, of my career development, was I had another offer at the time too from a company called Vicarious Visions in Albany, New York. And they were making Skylanders games at the time. And I had to choose whether I was going to go work on Skylanders, which was this well-established, like known like IP, or go to work on Siftio cubes, which are like largely unheard of and a really wild and insane project in San Francisco. And there were a lot of factors that played into that. It was like, do I want to live in Albany? Do I want to live in San Francisco? That was a pretty easy choice. But the other consideration was like, what do I want to do with my career? Do I want to work on big AAA games? The answer was yes, but also I wanted to explore innovative new things, and the Siftio team was amazing, and I just couldn't turn it down. Couldn't turn down the opportunity to come out here.
That ends up feeling like a pretty unique challenge. I guess when I think of Vicarious Visions, I think of things like they made like a ton of Game Boy games. If I recall correctly, so like a lot of like Tony Hawk ports and things like that, which I guess are kind of cool in the sense that you're taking, one thing and kind of working within interesting limitations to design another thing. That's always felt like a really cool challenge to me. But I mean, getting a chance to work with what are basically really intelligent cubes that you can turn into various puzzles or whatever. I mean, that presents a lot of cool opportunities as well.
It does, and like, I actually, I sought the advice from all of my friends and like all of my new acquaintances, our colleagues from Idle Minds, and pretty much like every sign pointed to go work for Siftio because it was going to be such a unique experience, and I would learn a lot. And I did. I grew so much there. I learned so much about puzzle design, which kind of forged my path as a level designer, because puzzles are inherently, like you're presenting the player or the puzzle solver, I guess, with a challenge that is, got its own language to it. And you have to teach them that language and then expect them to unravel this mystery and find their way through it in a way that's it's not frustrating in a bad way. It's frustrating in a good way. Like it's a challenge, right? And so I learned a lot about how to, teach players that the language of whatever game they're playing, whatever puzzle they're trying to solve in that moment, and then work their way through all of that while I was there. Plus, I learned a lot about hardware and companies in San Francisco and all kinds of stuff. But it was a pretty wild job, to be honest with you. It was like such a unique platform to work on. Literally, like working in like 3 dimensions. Like with these cubes, you could like move them around in any way you wanted, and it was a very cool job.
Yeah, I suppose it's that and an education in like startup culture, right? Which is its own own interesting piece to unravel.
Yeah, I'd never had a job where I they had food catered.
Yeah, yeah.
Like to like appease the workers and things.
Yeah, a worker revolt quelled by a convenient pizza delivery.
Exactly, and beer, of course.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it was good, and the team was wildly talented. Some of the most, to this day, some of the most insanely talented and smart people I've ever worked with. And I also learned a lot about building a team because it was a small team that the company relied on the people, getting along and the culture being good. And that was a huge part of it. So, all things considered, I think, like I said, the company went under, but I think it was mostly because the product was hard to describe. If you're wondering what it is, literally just go Google.
Yeah, you can. While we were talking, I looked them up because I wanted to see if my mental image was quite what I remembered. And yeah, 100%. I think when you see them, like it immediately makes sense. But if you were pitching them in a boardroom and you didn't have them with you, I'm sure, I don't know. I've been in enough boardrooms with like old businessy people that like they would need to see it because old businessy people are dumb.
Yeah. And that was kind of it. Like we had like one round of funding and then like we just couldn't secure the next one.
Right.
And like people who played with with the Siftio cubes, they were always amazed by them and loved them. But yeah, so then I became unemployed again, and in that time, I worked for random startups around San Francisco, mostly robotics companies, trying to help them build their like user experience and user interface for their apps on their iPhones and stuff. And all of that was like contract temporary stuff. But I eventually ended up at Crystal Dynamics.
Oh, wow.
Working. Yeah, they were looking for junior level designers, which at that point, like I was a little bit beyond junior, but I needed a job, so I took it. And I worked on a title called Lara Croft and the Temple of Osiris, which was the sequel to Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light, which are kind of these like top-down, like isometric couch co-op games, which were really fun. I think Guardian of Light was just such an amazing game. The sequel that I worked on was like, okay, it was all right. It's still fun.
Yeah. I think for people in chat who maybe don't remember as much about Crystal Dynamics, if it'll help people remember, right now they're working on the Avengers game.
Yes.
So if that helps put things in mind, but there was a lot of Lara Croft stuff from them too, because there was like an Endless Runner on the phone, I remember, and a couple other things as well.
Yes, the Endless Runner actually came from another Eidos-owned studio in Montreal. But yeah, Crystal Dynamics did a lot of Tomb Raider games, and eventually they like rebooted it as, instead of like a fun like comic booky style, like I guess just
This is where we get like the somewhat younger Lara Croft, and you get Rise of the Tomb Raider and everything, which kind of comes adjacent to Uncharted, and really kind of invigorated that whole franchise again.
Exactly, and there's actually some like really interesting discussion to be had around Uncharted and Tomb Raider, and the reason that it was rebooted as this kind of like gritty remake of like a more realistic Tomb Raider was because someone who used to work at Crystal Dynamics, Amy Hennig, had this idea to reboot Tomb Raider like that. At least this is the story I heard while I worked there. And she went to Naughty Dog, and eventually they made Uncharted, which was like this, it's like your Indiana Jones, right? Yeah. And so Crystal Dynamics then started playing catch up, and then rebuilt Tomb Raider. And actually, the original Tomb Raider reboot wasn't, and I didn't work on it, but it wasn't actually like this like gritty, video game up front until like quite literally like 6 months before launch, they started changing everything.
Those stories always scare me, right? Because the idea of kind of adjusting the direction of a ship like that is just like, ugh. I can't even imagine it, right? And I only experienced that, as a journalist talking to people, or at least in my previous job, right? Talking to people from all sorts of studios, hearing about the, design last minute changes to like The Witcher from CDPR people or whatever.
Yes, yeah.
And that always just feels like, just like somebody coming in and being like, well, actually, we're going to try this. And yeah.
It doesn't come without a price, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Crystal Dynamics as a whole, they definitely have like a culture of working a lot of hours.
Sure.
We call that crunch in the industry. I'm vehemently opposed to it. So my time at Crystal was a little mixed because of that. But after Lara Croft and the Temple of Osiris, I worked on Rise of the Tomb Raider. I worked on the hub areas quite deeply.
Oh, cool.
And then I worked very deeply on the Baba Yaga DLC, which was, I would say my pride of all of the things I created while I was there.
Very cool.
And I really, really recommend you play the Baba Yaga DLC of Rise if you haven't. It's good. Very trippy stuff. And then getting tired of kind of the crunch culture, I ended up moving to a company called NCSoft that was starting a new mobile game studio in San Mateo called Iron Tiger. Worked there for a while. The company went through, they were making all these new IPs and things, and the company went through all these like kind of structural changes, trying to get things right, and I ended up getting laid off from there.
Well, that's such an interesting thing too, because I guess the other alternative you would have had at NCSoft would have been like a lot of like MMO type stuff, right? Because they're Guild Wars and WildStar and all that sort of stuff.
Yep, Guild Wars, WildStar, I can't remember some of the other ones. Blade and Soul, I want to say.
Yeah, definitely that for sure.
I was there. And yeah, like a lot of the actual game that I was working on while I was there was supposed to be an RPG kind of style shoot off from there, which actually kind of harkens back to the game I was working on my first job at Idle Minds, but it was for mobile, so it was also a lot different. So that I ended up getting laid off there as well before we shipped a game. This is a pretty common theme in the industry as well. I feel like it happens. And during that unemployment time, I traveled a lot with my girlfriend, and eventually I was trying to be very picky about where I ended up next.
Yeah.
And I was talking to places like Blizzard and Respawn and these other companies that all make amazing games, but I had at this point in my career, I had a little bit of leverage based on my talent and skill set, and I also had a pretty good understanding of what I wanted out of a job from like a culture standpoint, as well as benefits and compensation in whatever format for selling my work to the company. And I wanted to go somewhere that was healthier.
Yeah, for sure.
A change. Double Fine popped up. Actually, this is actually a really interesting story. Like, I had the day I got laid off from NCSoft, I had a colleague of mine at NCSoft that was like, I have a friend at Double Fine that they're looking for level designers. Like, do you want me to send your resume through? I was like, oh yes, please, by all means. So they did that. A recruiter reached out to me, and eventually it turned out that they were looking for, it was like some third-party recruiting firm. They were looking for people at Double Fine. I applied through the website. I sent them a personal email.
Oh, nice.
And like all of these things fell through. But my girlfriend went to somebody's birthday party at this bar called Whitechapel in San Francisco. It's like a gin bar. And the office manager of Double Fine happened to be there, and my girlfriend and her hit it off like really well.
Hey, there you go.
They ended up like saying, hey, we need a level designer, and my girlfriend's like, hey, my boyfriend's a senior level designer, and through that channel I ended up getting the foot in the door and
very cool,
landing a role.
So what was the first game that you come in on then?
Psychonauts 2.
All right, that's kind of what I assumed, because by the time, the timeline you're talking about Rise and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I feel like that was, relatively recent when you think about it. So
it was, yeah.
So that means, Psychonauts has been in dev for a chunk of time. So
it has.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And then, how is that coming in? Right, like how's that feel going from where you were before to a place like Double Fine?
It was honestly kind of difficult because I had all this baggage from all these other studios, from the bad work practices they had. And no matter where you go, every company's got its own thing you have to deal with. It doesn't matter who or what it is. People are people, jobs are jobs, there's always some kind of complication. But coming into a place where Double Fine actually cares about its employees, deeply.
We get right now during quarantine, they're like, hey, every now and then take a day, just take a day so you don't go bonkers, which is good. Which is good.
Yeah. And just also moving to an unlimited PTO structure, which was a focus on mental health and just the well-being of the people who work at Double Fine was kind of a shift for me. And I had to let go of a bunch of bad habits just culturally.
Yeah.
And things like complaining a lot. I tried very hard not to complain about things right off the bat because I was just this habit I had gotten into. And obviously complaining was it doesn't do any good for anybody. It's good to, get your voice heard and to get this stuff off your chest, but there becomes a point which you dwell at it and it can sour your experience and your own perception as well as other people's experience with you. So I personally had a lot of growing to do. And as with any team, I think, the team had some learning to learn me. And so I have to admit, I felt when I came on, it wasn't immediately I hit the ground running and felt like I was a huge part of the team.
Yeah, of course.
But I don't think that was Double Fine's fault or anything of that nature.
No.
I do think that
I was gonna say, and presumably you're going into places a place that's kind of smaller, right? You're going from potentially larger spaces to, Double Fine's not really that big of a studio in terms of the amount of employees that we have.
Yeah, on Rise, I was working with a team in-house of 180 people, and then, I didn't even know everybody who worked there. And also like external teams that worked in like Montreal and whatnot, and so it was impossible to know to know everybody. NCSoft was a little bit different. We had a bunch of people that worked at the studio, but we had a smaller team size per project. There were like 3 projects going. I do feel like I had gotten into this space where at like bigger studios, where like you become an individual contributor to your specific discipline, and the process by which the process by which you work, your labor is actually like a lot different than when you work at a smaller team.
Right.
So when you're on a smaller team, you have to wear a lot of different hats. You have to interact with a lot of different departments. At Double Fine, and the 2+ years I've been there, 2 years and some change.
That's my dog. That's my dog. Sorry.
Oh, hi, doggo.
Hey, that's Kevin.
What kind of?
He's
Kevin.
He's a little shih. He's a little Shih Tzu. Why are you barking?
Hi, Kevin.
I'm in the middle of work.
Kevin wants to talk about.
We gotta get out of here. I can't play with you. So please continue. Please continue.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Doggo interruptions are always welcome.
Yeah, totally fine.
Yeah, so at my two years and some change, I've worked at Double Fine. I've had to do everything from level design and other design related activities, which are my forte, to like cutscenes and dialogue stuff, and it's it has been, that also was part of the growing process of coming on the team at Double Fine.
There's a lot of sorry for interrupting, because I think about it a lot, because I feel like there are definitely moments where, even in the capacity of what I do, right, which is very focused on public facing stuff, very focused on community engagement, or creating videos or things like that, where a lot of my job, particularly in leading up to like the Xbox showcase, which we'll talk about eventually, was like talking to marketing teams at Microsoft, which was like not anything I thought I would do, right? But like that's part of what I do, right? Like I have to sit down and be like, well, here's information about the level. Here's the name of our new power. How are we gonna have we heard back from Jack Black's people? And it's like, like that sort of stuff, which is very, very interesting. So it definitely does feel like this is a studio where you kind of dip your toes into a lot of different waters.
You do, yeah. There's, and not only that, but we do stuff like Amnesia Fortnite, where you totally mix up what you're doing. You can do a totally different role while you're building like this like in-house game jam kind of situation. So there's a lot of extremely relevant experience that you get working on a team that's smaller and makes requires that you wear different hats. And just interact with different departments on a frequent basis. Like I've worked more with audio on Psychonauts 2 than I've worked with audio on literally any other game I've ever worked on.
Yeah, of course.
Even at Siftio, like the audio team there was like one or two people, So, yeah. So it's been a really interesting experience. It's been a growing experience in a lot of ways, adjusting to all of these new things, and also like the other thing is too, like almost all of the games I've worked on have been very constrained. Like they've been very like inside of this box. It is this specific IP. It's Tomb Raider, it's Lara Croft, or it's this other IP from NCSoft, that they have that we have to work with.
I guess that does. I mean, that comes with a lot of different challenges. I've talked with a couple people on the team now who've had situations like that. I think Lee was working on a Superman game at one point. Lizette had experiences working on like Simpsons Hit and Run and stuff. Or she did like Tiger Woods, which is like dealing with an entirely different type of limitations, which is like, can we make sure that we get these appearances cleared and Nike logos taken care of, right? So I mean, I think it feels like a very common thing to a certain extent to come into projects where you have those pre-existing constraints, which I guess kind of exist for something like Psychonauts by virtue of it being a sequel, but because Psychonauts is what it is, the breadth of what you can do is just so much wider, right, than maybe you would do if you were going on to another Tomb Raider or something.
Oh, absolutely. And just the nature of the games that Double Fine makes and the type of culture surrounding that at the studio is like kind of almost like anything can go. And that in itself is a very big challenge because, working within a constraint of like, okay, this is Lara Croft and she's going to be climbing some rocks, like,
Yeah.
that's a play space like you can very easily like, imagine it even without even getting to pen and paper or building it in game or 3D.
Whereas now they say, hey, we have this brain in a jar. He doesn't have his senses,
Yes.
and now we have to figure out what that's like. And, Emily,
Yeah.
Emily has these sketches that are very psychedelic. And we're wondering if you and, James and some people could just like, can you figure out like that? It's like very different.
Yeah, it's so when the brain in the jar level was the first level that I got put on. I had been doing other stuff in the game, just kind of like side stuff.
Yeah.
And learning Unreal because I hadn't worked in Unreal.
Oh,
for
interesting.
ages.
Yeah.
So it had been all proprietary. Like almost every job I had a proprietary tool set. NCSoft used Unity, but it was still like so customized that it might have been. Its
Yeah,
own
of
thing.
course.
So I was ramping up on the project itself, and they put me on the brain in the jar, and the way that goes down was, Tim and the leads, they kind of come to you and say, here's the background story of where this is coming from. It's like Raz has got, he's found this brain in a jar and he's going to explore this brain. And there, other considerations with the narrative that and the place within the game, the critical path of the game. That had to be taken into consideration.
Which I've just figured out. I finally got a whole breakdown of the plot. I watched some sort of video of Tim just like going through it, and like there's a lot of things to juggle at once just to keep track of where the plot is going.
Yes.
I think we've revealed at least when talking about this game is I think people know that there's a mole in the Psychonauts and we're looking for information and everything. Mm-hmm. It's like all these twists and turns.
Yeah, and it is. Those are challenges in their own right because that's kind of like pieces of a box, but the box itself has a bunch of like, it's like Swiss cheese, it's like you have all these holes in it that you have to fill in.
Yeah, you have to plug them up.
Exactly, and you have to like make them make sense with all the other stuff that already exists. And the kind of like pattern that I realized with brains and like just the way Tim writes is like he'll come at you with like this the narrative concept of like who this character is, but he'll mash 2 or 3 things together, right? So like the brain in the jar thing is like you have this brain that has been in a jar for however many years, and when you go into it, it activates all the senses and stuff, and so it experiences this sort of like synesthesia thing. And the way that he wanted to represent that was through like a psychedelic rock concert.
Yeah.
Which you see in the demo, it's very clear that like, the essence of the brain is a performer.
Yeah.
Right?
The senses, the thing that I've had said to me a couple times now is like the senses are like a band coming back together.
Exactly. And that was part of the directive at the beginning, like the narrative directive was like, this brain all of a sudden is getting this flood of senses, and it's like the band has broken up and you have to bring them back together. Otherwise, the crowd is rowdy and it's gonna like, wreck the stage and stuff. And so, as a designer, this is like honestly one of the hardest things I've ever had to build almost from scratch.
Yeah, of course.
I sat down with Emily, as you mentioned, and Jeremy Natividad at first. He's an environment artist. And the 3 of us, we just sat down in rooms for like a month and just drew on whiteboards, wrote stuff down, talked about all the different types of things we could potentially make this level be, make this brain be. And like synesthesia has this interesting history at Double Fine as well, especially for Psychonauts. They explored it on the first game, decided it was too wild and hard to achieve, and then actually when I interviewed at Double Fine, we did this whiteboard exercise where we just kind of built a brain from scratch, and we talked about like the potential like challenge in the brain, right?
Yeah,
like,
sort
what
of
is
like
the brain dealing with
the core concepts are like the different touchstones that you might be drawing from or things like that.
Exactly, and that concept that we came up with in there was synesthesia.
There
like,
you go.
In my interview, and it's synesthesia is a really hard thing to build a level out of, because and any kind of psychedelic thing actually is hard to do outside of like from a design standpoint. And the reason why is because, like I said earlier, with the whole puzzle thing, is you're teaching, when you're playing a game, the designer's job is to teach the player the language of the game and how they can interact with the game. And typically psychedelic things and trippy, weird things, anything from like, psychedelic stuff like you saw in the demo, to like Lovecraftian horror, like cosmic horror stuff, to, synesthesia, all of that stuff, like completely turns just the regular language of what humans experience on its head.
Right. There's like a very free association, because depending on the nature of things, like it doesn't have to follow the same sort of rules or cause and effect that like a normal space would, right? The same way
Exactly.
that, if you're on mushrooms, all of a sudden your world changes. If you're somebody who has synesthesia, the way that you experience voices, right, or like what you associate with voices is so different than, what could be considered a quote unquote universal experience.
Exactly. And they're also like, first of all, dealing with that from a design standpoint was like a huge concern of mine. And we tried so many different explorations. One of my initial concepts was to go kind of like eternal darkness with it and just kind of start messing with the player's senses themselves and start playing goofs on the player and stuff.
No one's told me about that one yet. What happened to that?
That just kind of like fell by the wayside. There was a lot of overhead with that, and a lot of like really custom stuff. And it kind of also got away, like that got into like the realm of like confusing the player too much. And it got away from this idea of like, you're in this, you're like the theme was a psychedelic rock concert. And we started pulling a lot of influence from, like Woodstock, and just like the kind of like psychedelic rock phase of American history, American music history, should I say. And we started going down a different path. We tried to be true. Like one of the first things that we tried to do, or at least I tried to do in my level design, was try to be true to the Woodstock experience itself, and really research like these huge, psychedelic concerts. Like not psychedelic, just psych rock concerts and whatnot, and like the hippie culture and all of the things that kind of came out of that era, and try to be true to it, as well as some like the visuals, if you will. That are associated with that kind of activity. And it just started getting away from the eternal darkness, like messing with the player stuff. That was too like horror elementy and too
they're kind of living in different headspaces a little.
Yeah. And we explored a lot of different realms with synesthesia and whatnot. And then all of a sudden like Yellow Submarine came up as like a visual inspiration, and all these other, like the Beatles era element kind of media. And it just started shaping this level into more of a Yellow Submarine style, like psychedelic fun playground area. And that was kind of how I started approaching it as a level designer was, I wanted this space. This is one of the most colorful levels in the entire game.
Yes, very, very much so.
Yeah, and also a space where we could kind of get away with anything, because the whole thing is like this trippy mind, like synesthesia mixed with like this, the psychedelic rock concert stuff, like kind of give us a lot of leeway to build whatever we wanted, which, for better or for worse, that's like its own challenge, but it also became this kind of like play space, where we just wanted the player to have fun and like experience different sensations themselves while they were in that level. So that's kind of how the feel of the level came up. Emily and Jeremy worked really well as artists to kind of like lay the foundation of this psychedelic kind of feel.
I really want to end up sharing concept art soon. I think there might be a fig.
Yeah.
I think there might be a fig update where we go into some of that, but eventually I'll just be like, "Here's concept art." No one can stop me.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, Tim, like E3 last year, Tim showcased some of the concept art from the Brain in the Jar level. and you can probably look that up too. It's a lot of Emily's concept, and actually, so this is another really important part of production. Actually, of this level was, and this has happened to a couple of our levels in Psychonauts 2. Is I was the second designer and we're part of the second team that came in to build this level. So
Right.
we actually rebuilt it almost from scratch because the first time you build something, usually, I mean, who is it? Ernest Hemingway who said the first draft of anything is shit. And so, and not to say the first draft was shit. Actually, what they had built was amazing. Like the team had built something really great, but it wasn't hitting the marks that I guess Tim wanted to hit from a narrative standpoint. And we actually reused a lot of their initial concepts, like the colorful, psychedelic, rainbowy style, like very, very bright and colorful things were a pretty big part of the original level, and it became this the overriding kind of theme of the new level. And the team that worked on that, I don't know exactly who it was, but I know the designer was James Marion, who I believe
I think he might
if you
be.
ask me anything.
He might be in our chat, and I want to talk with him soon about a couple of things. I'm kind of breaking it up into chunks to talk about this level. This is just me like padding out our content schedule.
Sure, right.
But it's also like because we're talking about very specific things, and I mean they all marry together, right? They all combine in one way or another, the same way that art direction, and level design and mechanics, they all come together to help build a narrative, to build a story that you can eventually track in a level, all sorts of things, right? I mean, games are a huge collaborative process, but getting a chance to kind of focus on each individual facet gives people, I think, at least, or I hope, a better understanding of what each individual aspect is before it all comes together.
Oh, absolutely. And like, it's a huge collaborative process, and like I cannot express how like deeply the team got involved in this. Just like the people who were working on it, the people who were like inspired by it, the people who had worked on the previous brain. Actually, one of the funny things is, so in this Psychonauts, a lot of the brains actually like they know each other, and so
there's a lot of cases or like you have an understanding a little bit more like context, I think, this time of like some of the brains that we're dealing with, because I think in Psychonauts 1 it's kind of a new setting. You're learning people's secrets for the first time. Now these are people that or things like that, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, and like one of the coolest parts about this is like, you're in the Psychonauts headquarters, so you're dealing with some of the Psychonauts, and just like in the first game where you go in some of their brains, you do that in this game. And one of my favorite experiences actually was in building the brain in the jar, talking about the connections that exist globally, and just kind of like talking to the other teams and seeing how the narrative fits together from the stuff they were building in real time. It wasn't just a narrative constraint that came at us from Tim.
Yeah, of course.
This was like people who were working on their brain that cared about their narrative, and making sure that like we had the best representation of those relationships.
Yeah, there's a lot of specific relationships and a lot of specific kind of connections. These are all characters, or some of them I think have like shared experiences or things like that, which is kind of cool because that does give you a chance to kind of cross over and collaborate in some unique ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely really fun. I've really been enjoying this project. It's a lot more involved. Like again, when I was at Crystal, it was like, hey, build a cave, like build a rock wall.
To be fair, like some of those caves and tombs, very good.
Oh,
very, very good.
Very good, very inspired.
But it's a very different experience. And then also, I want to. This is my way of secretly segueing to some questions that some people have had, because some people are also asking about. Maybe this is something that James will be able to elucidate for us too as well. But how do you incorporate things like Raz's abilities, or like now we're finally able to talk about something like Time Bubble, which is essentially this this level's or among this level's kind of core mechanics, right? Which is using this Time Bubble ability to slow down platforms for platforming. You can use it against bosses and stuff. Like there's a lot of applications. So how do you consider those things when you're looking at level design as much as anything else?
So yeah, I mean that's definitely another part of the challenge because the time bubble ability itself fits in with a narrative, so you have to make that fit in. And kind of whenever you introduce a new mechanic in a game, one thing you want to do, just back to the puzzle discussion, you want to teach the player the language of that mechanic, and
Yes.
then you want them to play with it in a safe space, and then play with it in a quote unquote real world scenario, which would be like with enemies involved or something where there's a chance for failure. And then after that, you give them little bits and pieces of different ways they could potentially use it to kind of enlighten their use of that power throughout the rest of the game. And so with Time Bubble, like we knew that was the power for our level from the very beginning of the whole narrative concept. We knew that it was going to be an ability that slows down time. What that meant was kind of up in the air for a little bit.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I guess there's a
we had
lot of ways that you could have that manifest.
100%, and a lot of other games have done this in different ways too. I mean, like Dead Space has like the stasis kind of
Yeah.
thing, which it reads really well. So it's this thing that we considered, but then there was also like, well, like look at a game like Braid, where obviously Braid like you reverse time and stuff, but the idea of like what if like it's bullet time, and you slow stuff down, and like we had all these discussions about like man talking about time and synesthesia and psych rock and stuff. It was a trip of its own.
Yeah, I bet.
But we kind of like we started narrowing it down that like we didn't want the for other like we didn't want to create a bug factory is what we called it, which was like if you use this ability it impacts like quite literally everything in the game.
Yeah.
And that was like the overarching like we don't want a bullet time kind of scenario because we didn't build a game that supported that. Though we could have done it, but it was a lot of overhead, so we decided to make it more targeted towards specific elements. And
Well, yeah, because
that was
wouldn't the challenge of that be also that like once you have Time Bubble, you just have it, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
so now how does that affect everything outside of brain in a jar? Like
Exactly.
it's tricky.
Exactly. And so, and that really works well with Raz's other powers because, his other powers are very specific. They target a specific thing. You interact with like kind of one thing or a couple things at a time with them. And, they don't do these giant, world changing things. They do like, like I'm using telekinesis to move a bench or something, whatever.
Yeah.
And so Time Bubble started getting more refined over time. It actually started out as an actual bubble.
Oh,
that,
interesting.
Like, floated out kind of like a, like a soap bubble or something. And we had problems with that because the Time Bubble would float out and sit in the world. And then we had to have this discussion like, okay, well, should the Time Bubble itself, the bubble, should it surround the object, the actor that it is slowing down? And then if that's the case, what happens if something else enters the bubble? How much of the thing has to enter the bubble for it to be slowed down?
Yes.
Yeah, and James just mentioned this, like, it just felt awful when the edge of the bubble barely touched something and that thing would be slowed down. But then it also didn't make sense if that edge of something was in the bubble and it didn't slow down. And so
Right.
we started getting away from that visual language of it being an actual bubble and turned it into this, like, kind of explosion of Trapper Keeper art that you see
Yeah,
now,
because now
in the demo.
what it is now you sort of zap the object and it affects the object itself. So if there's a platform like one of those fish that are in the level or something, you're essentially like hitting that, zapping it, and changing certain parameters on it to be like move slower, please. Like
Yeah.
which now because now it's not like a physical space where things like passing through a theoretical bubble or anything like that.
Exactly. It's a much more like I think refined experience, and it I think reads to the player like more clearly.
Yeah, it's snappy in the way that like pyrokinesis is snappy or something.
Exactly, and I think that Tazio is our VFX artist, and he worked very closely with us to develop the visual language of this whole thing, and he went through all these different iterations. He worked very closely with us on a lot of the visual language in the demo that you see, and a lot of the trippy stuff you see, all of the like mandalas that you see, and like the crowd and stuff. And he worked very closely with us in amazing ways to create this sort of experience that you see now. And so one of the coolest things, like I think he came up with, and like this was I don't know whose idea it was, but when you time bubble something, that thing turns black and white, but leaves like a rainbow trail.
Yeah.
And I think that it works so well. It's so satisfying and it looks so good. I love time bubbling everything in our game because of that. So it looks great. But yeah, so that's kind of how the evolution of it. We went through like various stages of how is this actually going to work in our world, in our game, and all these different considerations and quite literal edge cases with the edge of the bubble and everything. And I think the way we ended up on this visual language was we actually had this version where the bubble would touch something and then pop, and then that thing gained the visual language of the bubble.
Right.
So like it would change the like texture of the thing, and then the material, and then then you would know it was time bubbled or whatever. And so it became this popping bubble, which then led to this explosion of like almost 80s aesthetic kind of feel.
So with some of this stuff in mind, then how do you figure out the cadence of what you're doing at any individual point? Because this is a level 2. I don't think we really got to show it as much in the trailer, but this is a level where you're climbing. This is a level where you're sliding down rails and falling into the abyss if you're me.
Yeah.
So
yes.
So it feels like there's a certain ebb and flow here that's going on, and also like I think we should stress too that like what was in the trailer is not the totality of what is in this level.
Correct.
Like there's a lot more going on. So how do you kind of measure and balance that sort of stuff?
Well, I mean, it's all pacing, right? And so everything, I try to think of it as like a frequency or a wavelength, right? So everything has up moments and down moments and in between moments. And you have various elements that you can look at individually, like how often do you encounter a thing that you need to time bubble, to slow down, to pass, to progress beyond the level? How often do you have calm moments between combat? How often are you climbing and platforming on things? How often are you using, we call them movement primitives, like like trampolines or tight ropes, or like we call them H pulls, the little like swingy pulls, like you swing on like a tree branch or something.
Yeah, there's plenty of them for sure.
There's a billion of those things in our game. I hope you like swinging on.
Well, I mean, Raz is an acrobat, so there you go.
Yeah, at his core, he is an acrobat. So, and you want to celebrate that too, and so it all comes down to just kind of like pacing, both from like a overall, like you want to look at it holistically, like the game as a whole, but also like individual parts of the game. And so what we try to do is like, say like, okay, this part, I feel like we haven't had combat for a while, so we want to put that here. Like, I feel like we haven't had a time bubble thing here, or we haven't introduced a new time bubble concept in a while, so we want to introduce that here. And like you said, this is like what you saw both in the released, trailer, the E3 trailer, as well as, Jablinski Games just released his playthrough.
And quite frankly, what I'll probably do with this and the thing with Lizette and Emily is I might just play some of it and show off more and make a video that also has our voices over this so people can see a little bit more of what we're talking about contextually, which will be good. Just to kind of give people a bigger sense of what we're talking about and kind of what we're dealing with. Yeah,
I mean, like to kind of give you an idea of how big this level is, I actually, so the original direction was that you're at this big music festival and you're finding the band who is broken up all over the festival. And again, like I said, I try to model it as closely to like the Woodstock layout as possible because I was just inspired by that. And the closer you get it to the real thing to begin with, the closer it ends up like being this cool abstract of a thing in the end, in my experience. And so I actually built this, like the original concept that I built was an actual huge, like Woodstock size, like the town of Woodstock.
Yes.
Not just like the stage, but you could go to like various parts and you see in the E3 demo, you see this map where you see like the Feelmobile.
Yeah, you got to hop in the Feelmobile.
Yeah, and
the dubiously named Feelmobile.
Yeah, exactly. And so you just go feeling around the festival map, and And at first it was like this super trippy psychedelic thing where you would like, the whole world was kind of roiling and that made everybody real sick. And also like walking felt weird because we wanted you to get there quickly, but also we wanted you to experience the size of the level. And eventually turned into this kind of more compartmentalized thing where you are on like a map with a fieldmobile, which lets you get to places quicker and it's cute, and kind of fun to play around on this little map as a little bus.
Yes,
VW
yeah,
bus.
yeah, it's great.
And then if you notice in the E3, the level that we like made the demo for your E3 was originally supposed to be playable by the public at E3.
Yes.
And the part that you would see and like that is in the demo is we call it the eye shrine. It's the vision shrine. So it is you're finding Vision's violin.
Yeah, there's others too. There's like the hand shrine and all that.
Exactly. And there was a lot of balancing involved there because we couldn't do shrines dedicated to each sense, so we had to like mix some of them.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of fun. And so you're just kind of like the pacing that it came out to be was like these really like it feels like a big festival. It's still to me it feels like a big festival that you're driving this little bus around and stopping off to visit little areas. You're searching for the band, you find them, you help them recover their instruments and deal with their, getting in sync with the other senses. And it feels to me like this kind of larger experience, but like that like what you saw in the E3 demo and the part that Jack Black played on Jablinski, I think was like one or like what was it? You saw like 1, 2, 3 parts out of like
because it's mostly
like 12.
It's
parts
mostly
to this
going
whole
up
thing.
to grab. I think the violin. I think is what it is. Mostly that section.
Exactly, and that's kind of like the tutorial for the brain. That's like the tutorial for the level.
Like I was saying to people, there's a lot more going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on, and again, for better or for worse, maybe I created too much work. But
the person who showed up to his job interview with like an entire mod instead of a level, no.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Someone's asking if we can name the name of the level, and the answer is no, we cannot.
We cannot. It's a brain in a jar.
Yeah,
but
I'll tease you with that. Is what I'll do.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think people will be starved for content and unique experiences in this game.
Yeah, that's one of the things because we had the purchase from Microsoft, and I think there was an opportunity to really kind of go back and reconsider what our scope was, and obviously we want to get the game out there because I think people have been waiting for the game.
Developers have been waiting for the game.
Yeah, well, it's like it's because that's one of the things people talk to me about a lot is just when can we get a date, and the answer is for now 2021.
Yes,
but the answer is that like we had this opportunity to really consider scope and consider what we want to do, and it's like when you see some of the stuff that's there. It's really cool. It's really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, the creativity and technical skill and like the visual, like the art side of things, just like all of the stuff we're creating in this game, like frequently just blows my mind.
Yeah.
I'm just always impressed. I'm always like blown away by the stuff that we're putting in here. Every time, every week we do now play tests of all the stuff everybody else is making. And it is just constantly like, oh my God, that is cool as hell. I cannot believe that's a game.
Our new boss, our new XYZ thing. It's very, very cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool to see.
Yeah. And I see some chat in here is talking about longer than Psychonauts 1. I don't actually know how long Psychonauts 1 was.
Yeah, that's always a hard proposition to make. Because I know this as somebody who was a journalist and my job was like to review games and like, I don't know, I had to beat Cuphead in like 8 hours or something. Like the turnaround on that was really quick. Microsoft gave me very little time, right? So like the idea of what is long or not, this sounds like I'm copying out, but what I mean to say is like that's pretty relative. But the thing is here, like some of these levels are pretty sizable.
They are, and we've actually scaled a lot of them back because they were already so big, like that's also part of the pacing thing, too. Like we don't look at it and say like, well, can we get this done? I mean, that's part of it, of course.
Yeah.
But, we look at it and we say like, does this actually make sense for this brain, for this level to be as long as it is and as involved as it is? Just considering its place within the game.
Knowing where it is within the narrative or things like that. Like, what are the moments, in the story where like the momentum needs to be so much more greater, or when are the times where we can say like, well, here's your time to explore and go back and clear out those mental cobwebs or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because there will be collectibles. I think somebody, I don't know if I don't know if we've ever said, but it's in one of those videos that we put out on our I think our Twitter. But it's like, emotional package and stuff. It's like it's there. Don't worry.
Yeah, it's definitely there. There are a lot of collectibles in the game. You will enjoy finding them all. They're going to be all throughout the game and in interesting locations.
Yes.
And they're all very punny. Like, I mean, that's one thing Double Fine really loves are puns.
Yeah. It's always part of the fun process. I actually wanted to ask you just some rapid fire stuff because people are asking a little bit about process. They kind of want to know how many people do you kind of say you directly work with when it comes to a level? How do you feel about that size of a team in terms of getting things done, or how does that feel as a collaborative process for you? And I guess some people also kind of just want to know what your experience working with Tim is like, very briefly. So just kind of talking about the team that you're with, and then kind of other stuff as well.
Sure. So, I mean, again, like when we started building the Brain in the Jar level, it was just 3 of us, but we eventually expanded on that. And then when we started getting the Brain in the Jar ready for the E3 demo, the team became much larger. And also, you guys saw the Lobato level from a while ago.
I think a thing worth telling people too is that, like, we were for a while too. There's moments, while Psychonauts 2 is being developed, where people are working on other projects. There are other things.
Yes.
I've gotten to play test some of them that like people have been working on, and things that are in early concept and idea phases now, like ideation. So as time goes on, those things they don't get put on the back burner entirely, but we have more people come in to respond to the needs of Psychonauts 2, right? Like depending on what needs to be done at any given time.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. So the team size does change pretty wildly. It's very dynamic. So again, like it starts with a smaller team to kind of build the initial concept out, and then it expands greatly. So yeah, I was mentioning I worked on the Lobato level as well, and that started off with a team, pretty much one person from every discipline. We had design, we had concept art, we had environment art, we had engineering.
I think that was Emily again too, right?
It was Emily again as well. Well, Gigi was on that as well.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, we have a producer, we have audio, pretty much one person from every discipline started out. And then we expanded on the Lobato level to include like more than half the team, I think. And then for the other levels I've worked on, there's definitely smaller team sizes. Like I'm on a boss fight right now, and it is a little bit, smaller of a team.
Right.
We've got a couple engineers, a couple artists.
I think there's a couple boss fight things happening simultaneously right now. I might be wrong.
Exactly, there are, and like that's a big result of the Microsoft acquisition as well. That was like one of those things where we tried to figure innovative ways to put boss fights back into the game that weren't quite actually boss fights, because we just didn't have the time and the budget to do it. Because we had built so much of the rest of the game, which I think is like the meat, But so for the boss fights now, we're actually focusing on like real legitimate boss fights that have, they're tied into the narrative, they make sense with the rest of the game, they have interesting mechanics, and the experience there is like smaller teams but more focused. Obviously, when you get ready to release any kind of content to the public,
anytime there's a big like public facing vertical slice, right? You want to like that's an all hands on deck situation if there ever was one.
Yeah, and one thing that you like, I think fans will be really cool, like stoked to hear about, is that like what you're seeing in all of these demos and all these videos and things, like you're pretty much seeing like alpha level footage. This is like subject to change and get much cooler.
Yeah, like, I mean, there's gonna be sprints and we're gonna figure it out, but I mean, there's always more development to come, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really cool. I think that's something that like people can really look forward to, is like, I think the quality bar for this game I'm not gonna lie. When I first came on, I had just replayed Psychonauts 1 to become more like, fresh in my brain. I had played it before, but I wanted it to be brand new.
Yeah, I need to replay it. That's my confession. I have to, so because the 20th anniversary is happening, I'm going to start doing, I think, a video series on all of our games.
That's great.
To kind of go over them. It's, my entire production capabilities got messed up because the fire at my department at my apartment and things. So I have to figure out all the things I can do again. But I'd love to go through basically all of the stuff that we have, right? Because we just put out a big bundle with everything too. There's so many things. So to replay Psychonauts, to go back and like really, like, I can't remember the last time I messed with Brutal Legends. So it's like, yeah. And especially for this, I suppose for you, it's like go back, play Psychonauts, have that feel, that sense in your mind again.
Exactly. But yeah, so when I went back and played it, it was obviously Psychonauts is an amazing game. And what they accomplished for the time at which this was released back in like 2004, I think it was. And the quality of the game that it was for a team that had never made a game that was like that before, like a 3D platformer. I mean, it's substantial. But coming onto the Psychonauts 2 team, I was immediately just blown away with the fidelity of everything. Yeah. I mean, like the way that Raz animates and his animations blend together when you're running around and platforming, it feels so good. It's so good.
Yeah, it was really nice. It was really nice to hop in, because I'm still pretty new here, but to hop in and just be like, oh, I'll play this, and like it makes sense. Like it all makes sense and feels right. It's like pretty great.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm constantly surprised by the quality bar that we're hitting in this game, and it's always a challenge, of course. But I think that a lot of the people I see in chat are talking about how Psychonauts 1 was their favorite game. They're really looking forward to this, and like, I don't know. I mean, like my hope is that it matches up with the first game's experience and just improves upon it. Like
it's always hard. It's always hard to, especially when people have such an attachment to a game or a series. I think as time's gone on, right, like that fondness has only really grown. So I mean, there's definitely a weight and an expectation there. But I think you're right to say that is cool. Like it's just cool. Like a lot of it's really coming together.
Yeah, it's definitely cool. It's definitely fun. Again, being part of this team and just seeing the stuff people throw in like every week, and I'm just constantly like, wow, I can't believe somebody even like thought of that, and it looks great. Yeah. And it works great.
I want to switch very briefly to something. I think a couple of people are asking this. Some people are asking finer things like difficulty modes or things like that. It's like, I don't know the finer details of that stuff yet. I don't know if it's actually things that we can completely talk about. But a couple of people are asking, have you or like the team as a thought experiment ever considered what the inside of your own minds would look like? Did you ever just say, oh well, let's apply that to ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had it. What's funny is like we haven't really had a direct discussion about that. I don't know, that might break some HR code or something. I don't know.
Oh, but, yeah, for
sure. No, I mean, I feel like just being part of the hive mind that is Double Fine, like whenever we do anything together, even in this remote work setup, like we're very connected and we're always talking to each other, and we kind of have like a deep understanding of, I wouldn't say deep understanding of each other, but like we get each other, and I feel like a thought process by like, sitting there and saying like, hey, well, like what if we went into Tim Schafer's brain? What kind of stuff would we mess with in there?
It'd be a lot of files, but maybe no filing cabinets, I feel like.
Yeah, definitely a lot of Post-it notes.
Yeah.
But we haven't really done that. We have done like deep dives into hypotheticals of what each of the characters' brains would be like.
Of course. I never thought of that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's one of those things where, and like what I was saying kind of earlier about like the different teams collaborating and talking to each other about like their brain's relationship with other brains, both from a design standpoint of like the abilities and things you'll have in there and the enemies that you encounter and whatnot, but to the narrative relationship and how we can highlight that inside of each brain.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. And as to like the difficulty, I mean, like one thing that as a designer myself, just one thing that I try to strive for is to make sure that the game is challenging in a fun way and accessible to everyone.
Yeah, that's because we think about accessibility in a lot of different terms, especially now
Yes.
because it's such a concern at Microsoft to make sure that we're taking into account people who might have certain physical needs or like color blindness or things. Color blindness was something that came up with Emily, but another aspect of that is just making sure that people can play and enjoy the game and that it's
Yes.
not crushing. It all kind of comes together into one big pile of considerations.
Yeah, it really does. And, a lot of that comes with just testing and testing and testing.
More testing.
Yeah. Like it's just, making sure things are passable. I mean, the game is largely, any game that you play is largely made by people who play it literally every day of their lives for years until they start bringing in play testers. And one thing that we do at Double Fine that's kind of unique is, we especially now that we work from home, we're able to let our like friends and loved ones kind of play test the game and take notes on it. And that's something that I've been like, I'll sit down with my girlfriend. I'll be like, hey, can you, play this for me? Does this make sense? And I'll just like watch her go through like the brain in the jar level. Like I absolutely, she just, she's played it a bunch and I watch where she gets confused and like I watch where she gets stuck and I go in there and, change that part, kind of situation.
Yeah, of course.
But the combat, also one thing that I do want to highlight, the combat, the team has been working really hard on making the combat feel good and be meaningful. And so it's not just like you're running around smashing stuff for no reason. And also it fits in with a narrative and again, it like Raz's abilities feel good. And I am very surprised with the level of fidelity that the team has been able to pull out of the combat, and I'm really excited for people to get their hands on that as well.
There's a lot of oh gosh, there's so many things I want to talk about. Just like cool little tweaks or like features that we can't quite talk about yet. Oh, it's such a pain, but I'm going to tease people again. It's really really good. So I was going to say, yeah, go for it.
I forgot the Tim question. What's it like to work with Tim?
Oh yeah. Oh, good point. Yeah, I forgot about that too.
Yeah, I mean, Tim's cool. Like Tim is a friend. Tim is a good guy. Like his passion is making cool games and stories and taking care of his employees. So like we play board games together a lot. Not just me and him, but like the whole studio.
Yeah, that's like I think it's every Wednesday. There's the dog again. We do a lot of stuff together. And like Tim, we just had our 20th anniversary party and, Tim was there participating. Everybody was there participating. It was a really good time.
Yeah, Tim, Tim's a trooper. He will go out and party. And even after the party is like quote unquote over, he will hang out still, and bar hop with you.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know. Nobody's going to stop me from saying this, but I think this is really fun.
I won't stop you.
The internal names for our projects are all named after bars that exist within the Chinatown area of San Francisco.
I think that came up casually, maybe in conversation with you, because I mentioned the code name for Broken Age, which I think people knew already because of Double Fine Adventure, the documentary, which was Reds, which was a bar as well.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and someone just mentioned Grasslands, which is
that's right.
And so that is no mistake. We've been to most of those bars, if not all of them, as a team. So,
yes. Somebody's asking if we can pet the dog in Psychonauts 2. Are there dogs to pet? I don't know. There probably are a dog. Is there a dog?
I mean, you're gonna have to follow that Twitter account and make sure that
once the game releases, you'll have to have to pay attention.
Just know that the entire team is aware of that Twitter account.
It's true. Do you have a favorite Psychonauts level?
Like from the first game?
Yeah, let's not say that. So let's not choose any babies right now from P2, but anything from the first game that sticks out for you. For me, I think it's always basic braining.
Basic braining is very good. Obviously, there are the standouts. The Milkman Conspiracy is great. It's unique and just funny, and it's kind of a unique thing that you hadn't seen in games before. I loved the kind of like narrative conceit within. I forget her name now. The actress. where she's got bipolar disorder and you flip
Oh,
the
right.
mask.
Yes.
Gloria. But I think my favorite one was the just from a level design standpoint was probably gosh, now I can't remember the name of the levels. The one Black Velvetopia. I think is that the name of it? That's what we call one of the meeting rooms at Double Fine because it's themed like that.
Yes, it is.
Black Velvetopia is one of my favorites. I love this bull that just constantly pushes you back to the beginning of the level, almost like problems like that you struggle with in real life.
Yeah.
You know, like when you fall, sometimes you feel like you've taken, one step forward and two steps back, and I feel like that's a really real frustration that level helped people empathize with. And just the fact that you can also get off the street and kind of take side paths, but they also had sensors in them and stuff. I also like the art direction for that level and Raz's outfit, and so I really like that. And actually, this is kind of a fun thing that you can do if you wanted to look into that a little bit deeper and understand my thoughts on it a little bit deeper as a designer. There's a YouTube channel called Game Maker's Toolkit.
Mark.
Guy named
Mark Brown. I know Mark.
Yeah. He is a treasure.
Yeah, he's very friendly, very nice man.
Yeah. He did a Game Maker's Toolkit on the original Psychonauts, and he talked a little bit about this. And I think that was his favorite level as well for largely the same reasons. Like Psychonauts 1 was this amazing game that allowed you to empathize with people's internal struggles in a way that didn't demonize them. And also, like, one big directive at Double Fine is that Raz doesn't punch people's problems to solve them. Like,
Right.
he helps people solve them. And that's also like one of those things when we think about boss fights and things, like, that we take that into consideration, and we try very hard to make sure that it doesn't feel like you're just running through people's brains, punching things to get them straight. Like it's, and it is, it's one of those really rare opportunities to kind of like see a little bit deeper into, as abstract as it is, and as obviously not real, like mental psychology, mental health practices kind of stuff, but it does help you empathize in some degree, and I love that.
Yeah, it's, I think this has come up in a couple of discussions that I've had now with folks, and it's this idea, especially too, that the core conceits of the levels, which are these interior spaces, allows you to arguably, I would say, more actively think about the ways that you want to integrate your mechanics into your narrative, into your visual design. They're like the kind of narrative into your visual design. I mean, you're always doing that with when you're designing a level on one aspect or another. But this is a very particular exercise in that, which is always very cool.
Yeah, it absolutely is its own unique kind of, like you said, particular exercise. And it's really fun. It's a challenge, and it's a good one.
Yes. I'm going to see if anybody has any like incredibly quick last minute questions, because I've taken up a lot of your time, and I actually need to run off shortly. And what I'll do is I think I've said it. I'll take this and some of the things I've talked about with Lizette, and I'll just start archiving these things a little bit more actively, especially now that I'm finally all packed up and moved where I got to be. So that'd be really, really good. Somebody's asking favorite main character for Psychonauts.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Man, that is a tough one. Favorite main character from Psychonauts. I don't know. That's like Mia and Sasha are like really big toss-ups for me, because I love Sasha's like, kind of like methodical.
Yeah, his shtick is very fun.
Yeah, I love that as a designer, as someone who likes to make things very clear and like well organized and things like that. I really appreciate him, but I also really enjoy Mia's kind of openness and kind of like colorfulness. You know what I mean?
Her level's such an interesting level too, right? That I think people have talked about that one so much, about these kind of bright, inviting spaces, and then all the dark stuff that's hiding and like kind of behind the scenes, right? Like I think that's a level that really gives you a sense of that her particular interior world in a very clear way.
Yeah, and I just feel like she has this nurturing kind of element to her. where she just she's a character that genuinely feels like her interaction with Raz, she wants him to succeed. She wants him to grow because she recognizes his potential.
Yeah.
Not that the other Psychonauts don't, but she just in particular has this kind of feeling for me, and it's a very like welcoming and nurturing kind of feeling, which is great.
It's very good. Somebody's asking, and maybe you can help me because it's like a small question that we're asking. Do you know who put the figment counter in the top right corner of the screen right now in the game? Because somebody's like really loving that. I think people hunting for figments is fun, but not knowing how many that you had before, a little frustrating.
Yes. So this is a design consideration as well as a UI UX.
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
And that's definitely something that we are, striving for is more readability in all aspects. So anything that you do in the game at all will have, hopefully, like again, this is like to be determined, but the goal is to have it have a way for it to be tracked.
Yeah, I mean, a lot
there
of
should
that
be no
stuff is kind of still being implemented in certain ways.
Yes, yeah. Like we actually today we just had an update on the like in-game kind of pause menu UI stuff. Like in Psychonauts 1, I believe it was his journal or whatever. And so and it's looking great. It's looking amazing. Our UI team is just killing it. And again, yeah, it's one of those things where the goal is to have every single thing be trackable and the very pertinent information be available to you immediately. So
Yeah. Some people are asking if the journal's coming back. I actually don't know what the pause menu looks like right now, if we're able to say. I think
I don't know if we're able to say. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of that stuff is kind of shifting still a little bit, right? You're kind of making all these individual decisions. I think when I was first playing the game, that might not have even been in the game yet. I might be wrong. I don't know. Maybe I'm losing my brain already, but I feel like these are, or that was in there sort of.
Yeah, it's always sort of been there, but like I feel like it's getting way more fleshed out
Yeah.
now. The one thing that I will say is that Tim's direction. This is one part of working with Tim is that he wants all the stuff in the game to kind of have a narrative purpose and be tied to
Right.
the narrative. So like it's not just like a pause menu, like it is something that makes sense in the context of the world that you are in.
Yes.
So
Which is very, very good.
yeah, it's always great to like immerse them players, get them in there.
Yes. So I think for now, that's what we'll call it for today, if that's okay. And
Sounds great to me.
for people who heard this, we've had a couple of discussions in here. Like I said, I'm going to save more of them. I'll have all this archived maybe next week or so. Once I have more of my equipment set up to kind of edit things into a video form, I'll probably have this one separate from the talk with Elise, Emily, and Lizette.
It's like a combination of
Yeah, I
names.
like kind of combined them together for a second. But we'll definitely start preserving more of these things. Somebody asked very quickly in passing, when is the website coming back? I don't know. Hopefully this year, maybe not. We're rebuilding it. We're making a lot of really good progress. And then eventually, I don't know, y'all are going to like it, I think. So that'll be very good.
Yeah. I'm excited to see what that is.
Yes.
That's me too.
We'll start showing it off to the team soon. I think a couple of art folks have seen some of the rough ideas, but we'll get there. Josh, this was great.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you to everyone who was in there asking questions
Yes.
and chatting along with and listening and
Yes.
whatnot.
Thank you, folks. We'll see you around. I'm going to hit stop on Audacity, and you can too.
I'm going to do it right now.